If you don't confess, I'll find a way to make you talk." Catherine Collins threw out the sentence like a verdict, but only seconds later, as she quietly followed the janitor into the darkness to wait for the moment to catch him red-handed. Everything turned upside down. Catherine, a woman who always believed she controlled every variable, witnessed something she had never prepared herself to face. A moment powerful enough to tear apart the entire belief system she had built over more than 2 decades. The janitor, she suspected, not the sneak she imagined. He was a single father, racing night after night to keep his daughter alive. A man who saw through the cracks of a loss-ridden system that no one dared to speak about, and the very person the entire machine was trying to crush, so every trace could be buried forever. So, what drives a CEO to secretly follow low-level employee in the middle of the night? Who is pulling the strings of truth from inside the company? And why can one father stand upright against an entire power structure determined to erase his existence? If you were in this story, would you trust a cold, polished reporter, the human being pushed to his final limit to find out what really happens next? Subscribe now. Don't let the next chapter of this truth disappear from your hands. New York at night stretched out like a massive body slumping after rush hour. Lights strung across buildings like mechanical heartbeats, steady and cold. Inside, Valor Tech, where people passed one another like blurred shadows. Alex Thompson began his shift. He wore a protective uniform, still carrying the scent of cleaning solution, pushing his familiar utility cart into the long corridor. The familiar chemical smell clung to his steps, along with the steady hum of the ceiling lights, making him feel as if he were walking into a void no one intended to fill. The work started in the meeting room, on the 12th floor. A torn piece of paper lay under the table leg and made him pause. He bent down, picked it up, his eyes skimming a few messy, hard-to-read words, like traces of someone who had ripped it apart in a hurry. "They let go too quickly," he said very softly, dropped it into the trash bag, then straightened up and continued cleaning the last traces of a day he had never been present for. The elevator opened at the end of the hallway. The last employees left the building, hands holding cups of coffee still steaming, faces tired. One person passed so close that their shoulder brushed Alex's, his body swaying slightly for a beat. The person kept walking without looking back, their coat pulling along a cold draft that brushed Alex's collar. Alex only adjusted the strap of his gloves and turned into the next meeting room. He was used to collisions with no one behind them, used to not existing in anyone's thoughts. The storage room sat in the most hidden corner of the 8th floor. Alex opened the door, light spilling down the rows of shelves like a line of living files. He scanned each supply box, stopping at an unexpected space. One container was missing in an area assigned to another department. He looked for a second, his breath coming out so lightly it almost dissolved into the air. "This has nothing to do with me," he murmured, noted it on the tracking board, then straightened the remaining boxes. Each action felt like a habit meant to keep things stable in a day that never truly belonged to him. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Emily Carter sat in her office, washed in city light, her face tilted under the desk lamp, a folder open before her. Numbers highlighted in yellow on a loss report. Items had been disappearing in a hard-to-explain cycle, and Alex's name appeared regularly in time slots after 10 at night. She tapped the tip of her pen lightly against the desk edge, her gaze sharpening. "Strange. It's rare for someone to be connected to this many time points," she said to the assistant, standing near the door. The assistant only nodded, already accustomed to how Emily focused on what others overlooked. A secondary screen on the desk showed footage from the camera system. Alex appeared in the hallway, pushing his cart, his expression tired but quiet. The overhead lights flickered in pulses, making his figure seem to dissolve into the pale tiles and then emerge again. Emily watched for a long time, her look not quite suspicion, not quite trust, like someone trying to see whether all the data could fit together. Alex continued up to the 12th floor, stopping near the window to look down at Manhattan. Distant buildings were covered in a soft layer of light, and cars slid past as long streaks below him. He placed his hand on the glass, the warmth from his palm fading quickly into the cold mist. "Lily, just hang on a little longer. Dad will manage," he said, his voice blending with the wind pressing through the door frame. In that moment, He looked like someone trying to keep balance between responsibility and a fatigue he could not share with anyone. Above, Emily flipped to the final page of the report. Alex's name sat in the time log, repeating like a mark attached to every loss. She frowned. A janitor appearing at different times throughout the night was not unusual for his role, but the number of overlaps was too much to ignore. She stood up, took a few steps around the room, as if retracing the paths of reasoning in her mind. Doubts spiraled back in, as though she were seeing a small crack running up from the foundation without knowing where it began. She looked at the screen again and saw Alex putting away his tools, his movements natural. There was no sign of someone hiding wrongdoing. Emily stepped closer to the glass, her reflection overlapping with the faint image of Alex under the cold strips of light. Every report she had pointed toward him, yet her instinct did not follow the same direction. She stood still, as if trying to define something the data could not describe. Alex finished the final area, his footsteps echoing evenly through the empty hallway. He checked the task list once more, locked the tool cabinet, then pushed the cart back into storage. His face showed nothing beyond long-settled exhaustion, as if every emotion had been stored somewhere deep and unreachable. Emily returned to the desk and looked down at the report again. The line marking the time of loss beside Alex's name made her pause. It was not the feeling of a conclusion, but the sense of having glimpsed a larger question beneath the numbers. The events looked clear, yet did not align with her intuition. She sensed something hidden by its very simplicity. She switched off the desk lamp and took her coat from the chair. The room darkened as city light replaced the artificial glow. She walked to the door, stopping for a beat, as if to confirm that her next decision was not driven by emotion. But the instinct of a leader always knows when data is not enough. She wrapped her hand around the doorknob, her eyes directed toward the long, quiet hallway of the executive floor. Tonight, I'll see it for myself. Alex left Valortech almost immediately after finishing the final check of his night shift. He locked the side door with a familiar motion, turned the key. He took a breath and stepped onto the street. Pedestrians were sparse, and traffic lights changed colors, with no one waiting. His steps were fast and decisive, as if an internal clock were ticking urgently inside him. Across the street, in the shadow of a bus stop, Emily stood there in a long coat, her eyes tracking him. The distance between them was not great, yet he had no idea his every movement was being watched. She kept a steady distance, one hand resting on her bag, to look like she was simply following a normal route, but her gaze stayed fixed on his back. Alex crossed the street, his shoulders drawing in slightly as a cold gust struck his neck. Emily followed a few beats behind, her shoes touching the concrete with so little sound they almost vanished. He went straight to the subway, stepping onto the train just before the doors closed. Emily rushed in seconds later and entered the adjacent car. As the train moved, she watched Alex's reflection in the fogged glass, saw him leaning against a handrail, head slightly lowered, the posture of someone hiding exhaustion behind urgency. The train stopped in Brooklyn. Alex got off first and turned onto a narrow street leading to an old apartment complex. Emily slowed a little when she saw him quicken his pace more than usual. The door of the small apartment opened after he knocked twice. Lily ran out and wrapped her arms around him. Alex bent down, circling his arms around her, lifting her as if afraid of hurting her. Lily touched his face and asked, her voice as small as a breath, "Is something wrong, Dad?" He set her down and smoothed her hair. "I'm just a little tired. Don't worry." Emily stood on the opposite staircase, her silhouette blending into the hallway, shadows so no one noticed. Her hand gripped the strap of her bag so tightly her fingers paled. He led his daughter inside and turned on the soft yellow light. Emily heard him ask about her medicine, about her exercises at the hospital, about whether she had slept well. His voice changed whenever he spoke to Lily, warm and gentle, as if a single harsh word might put more strain on that small heart. When Lily asked if he was sad, Alex paused for a beat. "I'm just tired. Tomorrow will be better." He bent down and kissed her forehead. That brief moment left Emily frozen, because it completely contradicted her image of a man suspected of stealing. After Lily fell asleep, Alex stepped out of the apartment with a painful paint bag slung over his shoulder. Emily pulled up her hood, went down the stairs, and kept a distance of about 20 meters. Alex never looked back. He walked along a dark street, turned into a trash alley where people avoided eye contact. Emily followed, her breath dissolving into the night, but unable to quiet the curiosity tightening in her chest. Only when Alex stopped beneath a bridge, casting long shadows onto the concrete, did she stop as well. Leaning her back against a stained wall, her heart beating steadily but harder than usual, Alex set the bag down, pulled out several spray cans, and shook them, producing sharp, rattling sounds. Emily frowned, wondering if she was about to witness something that would force her into a difficult decision. But the moment Alex raised the can and sprayed the first patch of color onto the wall, that thought shifted. He did not write words or threatening symbols. He painted a heart split in two, the broken pieces held together by brace-like lines, as if someone were trying to close a deep wound. The strokes were sharp, fast, rough, yet packed with pressure, like pouring everything unsayable into the motion. Emily narrowed her eyes, but this time not to study details. Rather, to keep the emotion rising inside from showing she had never imagined that this man, whom the system automatically treated as the lowest layer and easiest to blame, carried a whole world she could not reach. Alex stepped back, looked at the wall for a second, then continued painting. "There's still a lot to deal with tomorrow," he breathed out, the words light, as if spoken more to himself than to the world. Emily tilted her head and caught the sentence, even though he spoke only loud enough for someone nearby to hear. Still, the distance between them seemed to shrink because of a feeling she could not name. She watched paint run down his hand, spreading across his fingers like blood, and he did not notice. Each next stroke felt like a blow against a fear trying to surface. He painted by releasing rather than creating art. A gust of wind pushed his hood slightly askew. He reached up to adjust it. The movement? Natural, like someone so used to pressure that even the smallest acts had become part of survival. Emily observed every detail with the eyes of someone relearning how to look at life from an angle she had never stood in. Her earlier doubts, built on flawless reports and numbers assumed to be objective, suddenly became heavy stones hanging in her mind. They began to crack, little by little, like the wall in front of Alex, splitting exactly along the shape he was painting. He stepped back to look at the entire piece once more. The heart stood clear, surrounded by interwoven streaks of color like layered thoughts. After a few minutes of standing still before his own work, Alex bent down to pick up a fallen spray can, about to put it into the bag. His hand trembled slightly, from the cold or from exhaustion. Emily watched that hand and realized the tremor did not resemble someone who had just done something wrong, but someone trying to keep himself from collapsing. He spoke softly, as if sealing the emotion into the wall. "Have to keep living. There's no other way." The sentence passed quickly, but echoed long in Emily's mind. It held so many layers that she felt something inside her shift out of place. Not the kind of shift that makes everything fall apart, but the kind that forces you to look again at where things began. Alex packed everything away, tied the bag, and stood up. His face under the yellow bridge light was clearer, the dark circles under his eyes deep, as if he had slept less than the breath needed to keep his body running. He brushed paint dust off his jacket, then looked down at his worn shoes. In that second, Emily saw in him a mix of persistence, turbulence, and a smoldering worry that made stillness impossible. She stepped back when she saw him preparing to leave the alley. Her heart pounded, not from fear of being discovered, but from the sense that she had reached the edge of something she was not ready to admit. Alex walked out of the alley, his pace returning to the same quick rhythm as when he left Valortech. Emily leaned against the wall for a few seconds, breathing in slowly, as if trying to keep what she had just seen inside her head. When she stepped out of the alley, her eyes still following his back, the words slipped from her lips, as if she could not stop herself. "If he isn't the culprit, then maybe I've been looking in the wrong direction." The following night, Alex returned to Valortech, carrying a fatigue that felt piled on from many nights before. What had happened under the bridge last night still lingered in him, even though he showed none of it outwardly. He stepped into the employee lobby, swiped his card. A soft beep sounded, and then vanished into the emptiness. The night shift was the same as always, starting slowly, then rolling up like a rock, tumbling downhill. always ready to pick up speed. He was used to it, used to the repetition. But tonight, everything seemed covered by a thin haze, stretched tight in the air. He went straight up to the 12th floor to check the meeting room, where daytime meetings often ended with piles of unfinished documents. The meeting room lights turned stark white when he flipped the switch, illuminating a whiteboard still smeared with marks, hastily erased. Faint numbers reappeared beneath the wiped surface, hurried symbols, like someone trying to cross things out before leaving. Alex looked at them for a few seconds and exhaled, as if used to seeing traces of races against time. He muttered evenly, like repeating a routine. They changed something again at the last minute. As he stepped farther in, he noticed a sheet of paper under the table leg. The air from the conditioner nudged it lightly, the edges folding over each other. He bent down, picked it up, and raised it to eye level. It was a KPI sheet, clearly printed in two versions. One version had a red number circled, the other replaced that number with a lower figure. He stared for a long moment, then placed the paper on the tabletop, as if it carried a different weight from the papers he had picked up before. He turned to continue cleaning, and saw another small slip wedged between a chair and a table leg. He picked it up with his gloved hand and unfolded it. The handwriting was so rushed that it slanted unevenly. "Don't let this get out. If the boss sees it, we're in serious trouble." Alex tightened his grip slightly, hearing the soft rasp of the glove. He did not know who had written it, but he understood something more clearly than the night before. Something was wrong inside the very floors that looked so proper during the day. After finishing the 12th floor, he went down to the 10th. At the supply storage room, when he opened the door, he saw an entire row of shelves empty, not missing a few items, but completely bare in the area managed by the department responsible for inventory records. He checked the monitoring screen mounted on the wall, which displayed the stock list from earlier that day. Everything was still marked as full. He stood there for a while, feeling as if he had just touched a major misalignment in the company's structure. He noted the situation and continued his route, but his mind began linking together more fragments than he wanted. Walking down the hallway, the sound of an argument slipped through the crack of a slightly open door. He stopped, instinct urging him to stay still and listen. A man's voice snapped sharply. "If we don't fix it, we're finished. Do you want to lose your seat?" The other voice was lower but tense. "I've fixed it several times already. What more do you want?" The first voice replied, irritation clear. "Keep the numbers clean. The report goes out tonight. I don't want a single mistake." Alex edged a little closer, his shadow tucked behind the doorframe. He could not see their faces clearly, but he heard every word. Each exchange exposed a part of the system's inner workings that he had thought he stood outside of. He thought of the loss reports Emily had reviewed, and instinctively understood that tonight's missing supplies were no coincidence. They were part of a chain of heavy pressure bearing down on management, and they were scrambling to fix things without letting it trace back to themselves. Another voice cut in, controlled but firm. "Just get it done. I don't want a janitor finding out about this." The words hit Alex like a hard knock. The calm he usually maintained at work vanished for a moment, replaced by a cold sensation spreading from his neck down his shoulders. He understood that they did not see him as a person. He was a space to push blame into when needed, like a blank sheet, easy to write anything on. He stepped back half a pace, careful not to make a sound. In that moment, he clearly sensed his position. If everything was slipping out of order, he would be the one placed as the anchor to preserve stability for others. People did not need the truth. They needed a name to carry responsibility, and he was the simplest choice. When he left that hidden corner, Alex slowly returned to the hallway. He glanced up at the ceiling camera, a habit to know whether he was being watched. But this time, he stopped. The indicator light on the camera was off, not blinking as it did every day. He looked closer, slightly stunned. A camera in the main hallway of the supply area was not working, and that was not normal at all. For a brief moment, no sound seemed to reach him. Everything sank and settled into a straight line cutting across his thoughts. He stared directly into the dormant camera lens, his expression not surprised, but something else, as if he understood that a deeper layer of the story had just surfaced. A disabled camera meant that his footsteps, or someone else's, vanished from all records. It created a blind zone, an ideal place to pin everything on him. If someone wanted to, In that moment, he stood still for a long time, then lifted his face a little more, as if trying to look into the very bottom of the motionless lens. It made his expression tighter, clearer. A thought passed through his eyes, slow but sharp. Perhaps the things he had tried to ignore, believing they were not part of his world, had already reached his feet. The camera remained silent. He quietly stared at it, as if waiting for a response. There was none. He loosened his hands and stepped back a beat, but his eyes still clung to the dark lens. He had just understood that everything began in a place he had never paid attention to, and that from here on, the path downward might be deeper than he had imagined. He stopped completely, his gaze still fixed on the ceiling, where the lone camera lay in shadow. And then he realized the thing that made the air around him seem to freeze. This camera had been turned off. The next evening began with the familiar silence of the building after work hours, but the air felt heavier than usual. Alex stepped into his night shift with the image of the disabled camera from the previous night still pressing on his mind. He could not shake the feeling that someone was turning everything in a direction unrelated to the truth. Even so, he cleaned the 6th floor hallway on schedule, wiping each trace of dust, aligning each chair, letting routine steady his thoughts. On the surface, everything looked normal, but he knew something was building, waiting for the moment to break through. Upstairs, Emily decided to spend the better part of the evening reviewing the loss reports sent by the administrative department. She leaned on the desk, opened her laptop, and reran the list of missing supplies from the past 3 months. Timelines appeared, along with locations, departments involved, and the names of those who accessed storage each night. She circled the common points, filtered out the usual scattered cases, then stopped when she realized the losses were concentrated in a single group, a group that had been heavily pressured on targets this past quarter. They were nowhere near Alex's work area. In fact, they were the opposite of the floors he handled. "Why does everything get pushed onto him?" she murmured, typing a note on the screen. The loss cycle repeats in the department under the most KPI pressure, not in that man's area. The note sat on the white background like a sharp cut into the company's otherwise smooth structure. She called the head of warehouse supervision. The voice on the other end answered quickly, almost too quickly. Emily asked why the camera on the 10th floor had been turned off. The man cleared his throat and said, "Maintenance. I'll check again." The unnatural reply tightened Emily's spine. She narrowed her eyes at the screen, the tapping of her pen fading as surface explanations stopped mattering. At the same time, on a lower floor, Alex went to the equipment area to get his tools for the next task. When he looked at his locker, he stopped. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone had touched it and failed to close it properly. His tool set had been shifted from where he always left it. These things were easy to overlook, but for someone on the night shift, small deviations signaled that someone else had entered your area. He took a breath, pulled the locker fully open, and checked each tool. Nothing was missing, but the arrangement had changed. Someone had deliberately tried to make it look like his carelessness. As he was checking, footsteps approached. A night manager came over, wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. His tone sounded casual, but the scrutiny was clear. "Next time, make sure you lock it properly. The company's watching these days closely." Alex looked down at the tools, then replied, slowly enough for every word to land. "This locker was locked when I left it." The manager gave a slight shrug. "Well, it's open now. You should be careful." With that, he walked away, as if he had gotten the reaction he wanted. Alex touched the lock, which was still warm, as if it had been handled recently. He closed the locker, but the unease did not close with it. He walked toward the supply room to check the inventory. When he opened the door, the lights came on, revealing neatly arranged shelves. He scanned the section that had been closely monitored for weeks. One brand new supply box was gone. It was exactly the type mentioned in the daytime administrative report. Alex stood still for a few seconds, studying the remaining shelves. Nothing else was disturbed. That told him the person who took it knew exactly what they were doing. He made a note and continued checking the remaining areas. But when he returned to his section, his eyes immediately fixed on the trash bin in the corner. Something new sat on top of it. A supply box was placed in plain sight, so clean that it did not look discarded. Alex walked over and bent down to pick it up. The same type, missing from storage. The same code, the same batch number. He looked at it, then checked the trash bin again. There was no sign anyone had emptied trash or replaced the liner. Everything looked as if the box had been placed there within the last minute. In his mind, all the links from the past few nights locked into a clear shape. This was not an accident, not a coincidence. Someone was constructing a story designed to place him exactly where they wanted. He tightened his grip on the box, hearing the plastic click softly. The evidence he had seen over the past days made it clear that some people were hiding their mistakes by dragging him down as a buffer. A voice behind him made his arm tense. "Alex, upstairs." He turned and saw the night manager standing there, eyes cold, as if something had just been finalized. The man continued, his tone flat and emotionless. "They want to see you." Alex looked at the supply box one more time and set it down by his foot, the sensation like someone placing a stone on his chest, making it hard to breathe, even though the air in the room had not changed. In the manager's eyes, he saw neither curiosity nor annoyance, but something closer to preparation, as if every next step had been written before Alex ever clocked in. He straightened up, keeping his voice steady, even though his hand still trembled slightly. He met the manager's gaze, his eyes darkening, as if marking a line he had to cross despite not being ready. He felt one thing clearly, that from the moment the supply box went missing in storage to this exact second, every path had narrowed into a single point. The manager did not wait a second, the doorway seeming to widen as he stepped back. Alex moved toward the hallway, feeling each strike of his shoes against the floor sharper than usual, like a signal that something large had begun to move. He passed the turn toward the elevators, his steps feeling like a slow fall into a well he knew would not be easy to climb out of. Each ceiling light reflected off the walls in broken patches, casting an unreadable glow across his face. The night manager followed one step behind, not rushing him, but never taking his eyes off Alex's back. Together, it formed a scene that clarified the truth he was facing, that this was a story already prepared, and he was being placed into the leading role. When the elevator doors opened, Alex looked into the cold darkness inside and stepped in. His hand rested on the control panel, shaking slightly, but his eyes held steady. The manager remained outside, looking at him the way one looks at a completed file. The elevator doors slid shut slowly. The night manager spoke, his tone unchanged. "Alex, go to the office. They need to talk to you." The interrogation room door closed behind Alex with a dry, heavy click. He sat down on a metal chair with a slightly uneven leg, the chill along his spine, coming not from the chair, but from the thickened air in the room. A steel table stood in the center, holding a stack of papers, several printed photos, and the supply box that someone had deliberately placed in his area the night before. The room was small, the white fluorescent light making everything brighter than necessary, as if forcing clarity onto things others wanted to treat as truth. The department head entered, set his document bag on the table, his face largely expressionless. He pulled out a photo of the box, waved it lightly in the air, then dropped it onto the table in front of Alex. "Explain." His voice was not loud, but it carried weight like a knock to the chest. Alex looked at the photo, then back at the man across from him. "That box wasn't brought there by me," he spoke slowly, not wanting his voice to shake from exhaustion. The department head crossed his arms and leaned back. "You were the last person working in that area. The box was found right at your station." "Who's going to believe that?" The sentence landed like a trap already sprung. The interrogator, an administrative staff member used to handling messy cases, added, "That night, the camera in the relevant area lost signal. Quite a coincidence, you understand. Everyone needs extra money, especially in a position like yours." Her tone was flat, neither rising nor falling, sounding more like an invitation to confess than a question. Alex clasped his hands together, trying to stay calm. "I've never touched anything that wasn't mine." He lifted his head and added, "I know what I do every day. I have no reason to take that." The department head blinked once and tilted his head, studying Alex for a long moment. "You speak well, but the last person in the area was still you." He interlaced his fingers, his gaze pressing as if to carve an answer into the tabletop. "Ow. Tell the truth. I want to understand your reason." At that moment, Alex's phone vibrated in his pocket. He asked permission to check it and saw a call from the hospital. His chest tightened. He answered, the nurse's voice on the other end, low and urgent. "Mr. Alex, Lily's breathing is worse. We're monitoring her closely. Can you come in?" His hand clenched around the phone until his knuckles whitened. "Half an hour ago, I was still at home with her." "Why so sudden?" And his voice went hoarse, as if blocked by something he could not control. The nurse said a few short things and hung up to deal with it. Alex lowered his hand onto the table, his eyes hollowing. The department head looked at him as if he had just found the weakness he needed. "You see, everyone has pressure. Many people end up in this situation and do something reckless. You're no different. This photo is the clearest proof." Alex drew a sharp breath to keep himself from standing up, but his body grew tenser by the minute. "I need to go to the hospital." His voice was thick from restraint. "Wherever you go, finish this first," the interrogator said, jotting notes on paper, paying no attention to the strain, tightening his face. "The company has to maintain discipline. We're asking clearly. If you tell the truth, it'll be easier to resolve." A light knock hit the door, and the department head stood up. "If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to record that you're uncooperative." He stared straight at Alex, waiting. Alex stood up on instinct. "I don't cooperate." With false accusations, when he left the room, the hallway air swept past him, but did nothing to ease what was tearing through his head. He walked as if off course, his mind heavy with Lily's condition and the tightening net closing in on him from all sides. Another manager stood at the corner of the hallway, leaning slightly, as if deliberately blocking his way. The man glanced at Alex and spoke loudly enough for him to hear, typical of someone who messes things up and pretends they know nothing. Alex stopped short, his back straightened, and for a moment, all the fatigue was pushed aside. He turned back, his gaze sharp enough to make the other man step back slightly. "What are you basing that on?" The manager raised an eyebrow, a slight curl to his mouth. "On the smell of trouble coming off people like you. Think about it. Who's going to believe you in this?" A sting shot up Alex's spine. He replied, "You know nothing about my life. Don't make things up and use them to push others down." His voice trembled from held-back anger, but each word was sharp, like a freshly honed blade. The man laughed, his voice overriding. "So what do you think? A night janitor, daring to argue back. Who's going to care what you say?" Hearing that, Alex felt like he had been struck in an old wound. Pressure from the hospital screamed behind his head, pressure from the interrogation stacked on top, and now the contempt sliding across his face. Everything seemed to collapse into a single point, squeezing his breath and forcing out a reaction he had swallowed for years. He shoved the manager's arm hard enough that the clipboard in the man's hand flew to the floor. The sound echoed through the wide hallway, bursting like an explosion. Alex stepped back half a pace, eyes wide at his own action. Not because he feared the man, but because he knew he had crossed the line. The company always wanted people like him to stay within. The clipboard rolled to the wall and stopped. The manager lifted his eyes to Alex, his gaze turning cold and sharp. He did not look angry. He looked as if he had just gotten what he wanted. He slowly curled his mouth, then turned his head toward the camera in the corner of the ceiling. "There," he said loudly, clear enough for the hallway echo to carry into the mic. "I warned you. He's the threat." After the clash in the hallway, and the manager's words echoing in front of the camera, Alex left that spot, feeling as if someone had dumped a massive stone onto his shoulders. He did not respond with anything more. Every word he wanted to say had already pushed him to the edge of a cliff. He walked slowly down the hallway, his steps heavy, each sound striking the tiled floor, like a reminder of the fault others wanted to pin on him. When he reached the storage room, he sat down on the small chair beside the supply shelves, elbows braced on his knees. His body sagged, but his eyes did not dull. "I've been fighting in the wrong direction," he breathed out, low but clear. "They have an entire system behind them." He leaned his head back and stared at the storage room ceiling. The lights above were steady, not flickering like the disabled camera the night before. Alex understood one thing very clearly. If he kept pushing back at individuals, at each accusation, one by one, he would only make it easier for them to turn him into the center of the trouble. The confrontation in the hallway had proven that he was striking at individuals, while they were striking at the structure. Structure always wins. He opened his phone and rested it on his thigh, going into the shift scheduling app. Information for night workers was scarce, but Alex was used to mentally recording every irregular detail. He began scrolling through the timestamps when cameras had been disabled over the past 2 weeks. There were not many, but each one belonged to the area of a single group. He marked them with his finger on the screen, his eyes narrowing as his internal notes started to line up. The disabled cameras were not scattered. They clustered exactly at the times data needed adjustment before weekends. Exactly. In the zones of management, under revenue pressure, he wrote in the small notebook he carried, camera off, KPI pressure area, consistent pattern. He pressed the pen tip down on the next line, because the sense of connections forming between events was becoming unmistakable. He stood up, walked quickly to the clipboard shelf, and took a printed system log from earlier that day. His eyes stopped at the access time row for warehouse entry. There was an access point at 1158 p.m., the exact night the camera was off, the exact area where the loss occurred. His gaze slid to the user column. The name did not match his shift, but belonged to a manager who worked daytime hours. He remembered clearly that night he had been on a different floor. "If I'm being blamed," he murmured, "then someone needs a clean story." The sentence came out naturally, like a truth he had already touched. He folded the log and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Walking through the dark hallway, he kept a steady pace, as if his steps were also arranging hundreds of fragments to find the real shape of the problem. When he neared the vending machines, he heard whispering from 2 auxiliary staff members standing close together. He did not mean to listen, but their words carried clearly in the space. One said, "So it's data adjustment time again tonight." The other replied almost immediately, "Orders from above. We only handle the small. The rest is on them." Alex slowed for a few seconds, listening to every word. They were not talking about missing supplies, but about adjusting numbers, and the timing they mentioned matched the log he had just seen. It felt like another brick being laid into the foundation he was building in his head. When they walked away, Alex continued, but his pace had changed. Lighter, yet sharper. He saw himself standing inside a much larger picture, where each part he once thought unrelated was beginning to lock together: supply losses, disabled cameras, reports that had to look perfect for leadership, KPI pressure, and nights when managers argued until their faces flushed. Nothing was chaotic. It followed its own rhythm, the rhythm of people trying to hide something bigger than missing supplies. Alex reached the window overlooking the building's back lot. Light from passing night vehicles cast his shadow long across the ground, making it look like 2 figures standing side by side. He saw himself in that shadow, small and quiet. But he also saw something else, that silence was no longer keeping him safe. He had thought resistance was the wrong move. Now he knew analysis was the right direction. He had to look from above, not from below. He turned back to the storage room, opened his personal locker, and took out a file of notes he had never shown anyone. Inside were weeks of observations from when he sensed something was off. Time supplies went missing, handover notes partially erased, nights when department heads did sudden inspections, moments when Alex saw people entering storage who were not on shift. He spread everything across the table, arranging it night by night. For the first time in weeks, nothing felt disconnected. Each piece leaned subtly in the same direction. "Losses happen in areas they control," he said quietly. "Cameras go off when they need to adjust numbers. Weekend reports always look too perfect." He looked through the storage room window at the empty hallway stretching out. All sound seemed to be absorbed into the space, leaving only the steady but strong beat of his heart. He placed both hands on the table, the cold of the steel traveling into his skin and sharpening his focus. "So," he said into the silence, clear enough to hear his own breath, "I'm not the link in this story." He stood up and closed the notebook. The long breath that left him was both released and held back, like someone stepping onto a path he did not choose, but had no choice but to take. He turned off the storage room light and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him with a sound that echoed off the wall, answering his thoughts. He walked past an intersection and stopped in the dark corner between 2 corridors. After fitting together the pieces, the final question that rose in him no longer carried doubt, only certainty. Light from a single bulb fell just enough to reveal his face, where resolve and worry layered together like coats of paint on the wall he once painted under the bridge. He spoke to himself, but his voice carried weight, marking something he could not take back. It's not me, and I know who's trying to create a culprit. Evenings on Valor Tech's executive floor were usually quiet, but tonight that quiet did not comfort Emily. It sharpened her focus, turning each thought in her head into something precise, like cuts on a sheet of glass. She sat before the screen, going back through all documents from the start of the quarter, marking them along the timeline. The light from the monitor fell across her face, making it look more angled, sharper, like someone standing at the crossroads of two versions of herself. One was Emmy Lee, the CEO, the system's guardian, trained to rely on data. The other was Emmy Lai, who had begun to doubt that very data. She opened the system logs day by day, hour by hour. Numbers flowed continuously, but her eyes caught a repeating pattern almost immediately. A supply approval was logged at 1159 p.m. The following WIAT-K at the same time. The week after, again, identical. She lowered her voice, as if the question answered itself the moment it left her lips. Why does the same person approve at this exact time every week? She pulled her chair closer to the desk. This was not carelessness. The approver held an important role, but not one that required staying up late to sign off. So, why were they doing it right before the data cut off? The question multiplied, carving shallow grooves through her thoughts. She stood up, took her laptop, and went down to the supply control floor. The corridor leading to storage was sparsely used, making the sound of her shoes echo along the concrete. When she appeared at the doorway, the night staffer startled slightly and straightened his posture. He pushed his glasses up his nose, looking at her with a mix of caution and unease. "Show me today's intake report," Emily said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried enough weight that the employee glanced at the clock as if hoping he had misheard. "You want to see it now?" he asked, anxiety edging his tone. Emily nodded lightly. He opened the system and pulled up the data table. Emily leaned in, scanning each cell. Everything looked standard, complete, and clean. But in the upper corner, she spotted a new entry, logged late just a few hours earlier, compared to the report she had reviewed upstairs. That entry was missing. "Who approved this?" Emily asked, pointing directly at the line. The employee looked at the screen, then at her, his shoulders drawing in slightly. "This entry. Are you sure you want to see all of it?" The way he phrased it made Emily raise an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He took a breath and replied, very softly, "Some things are better not examined too closely. If you don't want trouble?" Emily straightened. "I'm asking who approved it without recording it properly." Reluctantly, he said the name. A manager Emily knew had been under heavy pressure for failing to meet targets since the start of the quarter. The guarded look on the employee's face told her this was not an isolated issue. As Emily left the room, two mid-level managers were passing through the nearby hallway. They leaned toward each other as if speaking privately. One murmured, "If she touches this part, it's going to blow up." The other replied quickly, voice low, "She's not allowed to touch it. Remind the people below as well." Emily stopped and turned to look at them. Both froze, their expressions shifting as they tried to stay composed. In that moment, Emily's gaze held no anger, no sharpness, but something hard and glass-like. "I already did." The words dropped, leaving the two men silent, unsure whether to retreat or confront her. She kept walking, faster now. The data on her laptop felt alive under her hands. Every loss over the past weeks pointed to a single group, the department under the strongest KPI pressure. Supplies disappeared exactly when they needed clean numbers. Cameras went dark precisely when data had to be adjusted. Late approvals all came from the same person. She saw that the system was not broken by chaos, but by people using it to build a downward path for blame. Alex was not the center. He was the designated sacrifice if everything collapsed. She opened internal emails, reviewing monthly approval chains. A repeated detail made her hands pause on the keyboard. Reports were submitted earlier than the official deadline every night, yet the raw data arrived unusually late. That could mean only one thing. Someone was cleaning the numbers after hours. then sending them out. She leaned back in a small meeting room chair, hand resting on her forehead. Every data point she gathered pointed toward something leaders often avoided facing. Reality had layers that polished reports never explained. She remembered Alex's eyes, remembered his quiet, non-angry stillness when she had seen him before. She wondered how many times she had trusted paperwork, instead of looking directly at the people silently keeping the building running. The meeting room door opened. Emily's assistant stepped in, looking tense. "You're really investigating this SS?" Emily did not answer immediately, but only looked back at the screen. The assistant continued, "If you open this up, you'll be hitting the group that's always stood behind you. The people who supported you when you first took the position. You want to go against all of the—" Emily turned her chair and looked straight at the assistant. "I want to know what's true." The assistant swallowed and set a folder on the table. "The truth won't be cheap. You know that." Emily reopened her laptop, typed a few lines, and expanded the loss chart into a large table. Each point lit up like a signal demanding to be faced. The points clustered to one side, none falling within Alex's scope. She had reviewed it too many times to lie to herself that it was a coincidence. She saved the file, closed the laptop, and leaned back. The light reflected off the lid, drawing a straight line down the center of the table. She passed her hand through that line, as if acknowledging that from this moment on, she could not return to the easier position where trusting reports was enough. She remembered what Alex had said when she offered help to Lily. "If you buy my silence, this machine will still grind other people." At the time, it had irritated her, but now it sounded like someone placing a hand on her shoulder and forcing her to face a larger mirror of the system she herself led. She opened the laptop one last time that night and pulled all the data into a single board. Arrows, timelines, and her notes formed a dense network. Looking at it, Emily understood that the truth was not about who took a supply box. It was about a mechanism that forced people under KPI pressure to adjust data just to survive. And to do that, they needed a lower tier to absorb blame when things leaked. She closed the laptop with a decisive motion, the click of the lid echoing in the quiet room like a marker placed on her choice. Then they'll have to answer for it. Inside the Valortech building, after Emily began linking data into connected chains and asking questions no one wanted to answer, the atmosphere shifted quickly. Mid-level managers, long accustomed to living among polished numbers and edited reports, sensed a growing threat from the executive floor. They had once seen Emily as someone aligned with the system. Now her posture made them wary, like the sound of metal colliding before an impact. Internal human resources began holding closed meetings more frequently. Access to the previous night's camera footage was locked. Those holding the keys to data no longer followed normal procedures. Conversations became fragmented, gestures replacing words. Doors that had always stayed open were now shut. Screens went dark when someone passed by. These changes made it clear that the system was not standing still, waiting to be exposed. On the lower floors, Alex walked the hallways with the feeling that invisible eyes were pressed against his back. He had worked night shifts for years, but had never felt a tension so silent, like powdered metal flowing through the building. He knew the system's reaction began the moment he exploded in that dark hallway. That moment shattered the harmless role they wanted him to keep. Now, as he passed the night management desk, a low voice rose from a corner behind him, not aimed at him, but loud enough to reach his ears. "Delete those camera segments. She can't see what happened that night." Alex paused for half a second. He did not turn toward the speaker, but a chill ran straight down his spine. The voice was quiet but deliberate. He immediately understood that she meant Emily. They wanted to erase the nights with irregular signs, the nights when cameras went dark just as supplies disappeared. He imagined clips being deleted, data rewritten, and realized that if this was completed, they could bend the story in any direction they wanted. He walked straight to the interrogation room with a heaviness like climbing uphill, each step a stone driven into his calves. When he opened the door, the first thing that struck him was a new bag placed squarely in the center of the metal table. The seal was intact, so clean that he knew it was not something half-used. He stood there for a few seconds, his breath stretching longer than usual. Again, he said, under his breath, his eyes fixed on the bag. This room, once used to question employees for violations, had become a place to construct a story. With him forced into the lead role, he sat down, the chair letting out a soft groan, like tired murmuring. The door closed behind him, and a manager entered, carrying a stack of papers, flipping through them as if searching for a page with answers already written. The manager set the papers on the table and pushed the bag toward Alex. "Can you explain why this was found in your area?" His voice was even, steady, without hesitation. Like an actor reciting well-rehearsed lines, Alex lifted his eyes from the bag, red from lack of sleep and prolonged pressure. "I never touched it." He spoke like someone repeating a sentence too many times, yet still believing in its truth. "You know exactly what I do every night." The interrogator seated beside the manager folded her hands across her chest. She leaned back and looked at Alex with a washed-out gaze. "We know," she said, "but the report will say something else. And the people reading the report are the board, not you." That sentence dropped another layer of weight into the room. Alex tilted his head slightly, as if swallowing the tightness in his throat. "I don't want any report speaking for me," he replied, his voice quiet but packed with restraint. The manager flipped a page, reading highlighted sections, deliberately making the paper rustle with pressure. "This bag was found in the area you oversee. The camera didn't record due to technical issues, and you were on shift, put together. What does that look like? You understand?" Alex looked down at the bag, then back at their faces. "You're framing me. You know this has nothing to do with me, but you want it to look that way." The interrogator narrowed her eyes. "The issue is what it looks like, not what it actually is." That answer made Alex feel as if the air had been drained from the room, leaving only a bare, indifferent cold. He stayed silent for a moment, knowing that responding immediately would only make things worse. The minutes passed like a tightening wire. Upstairs, Emily was reading an email from internal security. The bolded subject line made her stop. "Request that the CEO avoid excessive involvement in the loss investigation due to internal process impact." She opened it and read each line. The wording was polite, but laced with warning. The senders were the very group she had begun to suspect. She set her phone on the desk and leaned back, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who gave them the authority to tell me I can't investigate?" she murmured. The question was not directed at anyone, but it made clear she was facing a wall. Others were trying to build to stop her from moving forward. In the interrogation room, Alex stood up reflexively when the questioning paused, but the interrogator did not let him leave. She placed her hand on the table, not forcefully, but firmly enough. "You're not going anywhere." Alex squinted. "I have somewhere I need to be. My child is in the hospital." The manager cut in immediately. "The issue here is the company, not what's happening outside. We're not done." Alex drew a sharp breath, feeling his body begin to slip under the weight of three pressures: Lily, his life, and the blame tightening around him. He turned toward the door and reached for it, but a security guard outside had already placed a hand on the handle, holding it in place. The manager's voice came from behind him, cold and devoid of feeling. "Tonight, you're not going home." The internal room door shut behind Alex with a dry metallic sound that struck his chest like a declaration. The air inside was thick and suffocating, making him feel as if he were sitting in a box that tightened with every passing second. A full day of interrogation left his eyes burning and his heart beating off rhythm. The only thought gripping him now was Lily, lying in the hospital, while he was trapped within the four walls of a company determined to turn him into a pre-written story. He lowered his head for a long while before remembering his phone was still in his pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled it out, the screen lighting up the dim space. He called the hospital, his voice hoarse, not from shouting, but from a day of restraint. When the call connected, he heard the noise of the emergency room, rolling carts, and urgent voices. "Mr. Alex," the nurse said, "your daughter is having more trouble breathing. We're trying to stabilize her, but can you come?" The question stabbed straight into his chest. He stood up at once, the chair scraping softly behind him. I'm being held at work," he replied, breath catching in his throat. "I'm trying to get out." There was a brief pause. Then the nurse spoke quietly. "If you can, You should come as soon as possible. She needs you." The phone sagged in his hand after the call ended. He wanted to rush for the door, to run to the hospital, to do anything other than stand here like a prisoner, simply because others needed a culprit. The door handle turned. A manager entered, his shirt pressed flat and emotionless, carrying a stack of papers and a dark pen. Without greeting, he placed the document on the table and slid it toward Alex. "Read this," he said slowly. "It's not hard to understand." Alex glanced down. The first line chilled him. It was a minor confession form, a statement to let the company close the case internally without escalation. The document said he admitted to accidentally allowing supplies into his assigned area, causing a small loss, and would accept a formal warning. The manager gave him no time to think. "Sign this," he continued, "and you keep your job. You stay on the night shift. No pay cut. And most importantly, you can leave right now to take care of your daughter." Alex looked up, meeting the man's eyes. "I won't sign something I didn't do." The manager leaned back against the table, hands on the edge, his voice hardening. "Do you think anyone is on your side right now? Everything has already tilted this way. We don't like forcing people. You know that. But everything is against you. One signature makes this disappear." Alex felt his throat dry to the point of pain. He remembered the nurse's words, remembered Lily's face struggling for breath during her last hospital stay. But signing that paper meant turning himself into a shield for the people, using him to dump their guilt. He swallowed slowly and answered, "I may not have anyone standing with me, but at least it won't be you." The manager studied him, then smiled lightly, as if he had been waiting for that exact reply. He stood, tapped 3 fingers on the paper. "You'll see how much losing your job hurts." A security guard entered at the same time. No one ordered him, yet he walked straight to the door and turned the lock, the click echoing through the room like a hammer strike. "Procedure," the guard said, eyes not meeting Alex's. "During an investigation, no one leaves." Alex rushed to the door, grabbed the handle, but it did not move. He twisted it hard, then gripped the metal frame, as if trying to reclaim some control in a situation crushing him from all sides. The wall reflected his uneven shadow, his shoulders shaking with rapid breaths. "What else do they want from me?" he burst out, his voice heavy, like lead. No one answered. The manager gathered the papers, no longer hiding the satisfaction in his eyes at Alex's desperation. "This resistance," he said before leaving, "only makes things worse. You chose this." The door closed again. Alex heard footsteps fading, then silence. He leaned his back against the wall, head bowed, trying to reclaim the breath being squeezed out of him by a situation he did not create. Sweat dampened his hands, even though the room was too cold to justify it. Lily was alone in the hospital, and he was locked here because those in power wanted to rewrite the story their way. He trembled, but something inside him was changing, not weakening, but numbing after crossing a limit. When he closed his eyes for a few seconds, thoughts burst apart like fragments. Someone had placed the bag in his area. The camera went dark that night. The report was prepared in advance. The manager's words in front of the camera, "Nothing was accidental." Everything formed a tightening loop, meant to push him into the role they needed. Outside the room, footsteps stopped. A low, the urgent voice cut through the metal door, loud enough to reach him. "Prepare the suspension notice." Right after receiving the internal report, requesting that she avoid excessive interference, Emily did not leave her desk. She sat still for several minutes. The screen light reflected onto her face, sharpening the severity of her expression. She could feel a quiet shift inside the company, like concrete slabs beneath Valortech beginning to tremble from things people were trying to keep hidden. But what made her stand abruptly was not the email. It was a sudden message from her assistant. "They're holding Alex against procedure." It took her half a second to grasp the weight of that sentence. Then she moved quickly into the hallway, her shoes striking the floor with a straight, forceful sound, like a warning sent to the walls themselves. As she drew closer to the interrogation area, she caught fragments of conversation inside, voices straining to sound calm while shielding something improper. When Emily pushed open the interrogation room door, it slammed inward like a direct blow to the tightly sealed air. Everyone inside turned toward her. Her gaze swept across the table, across the pristine supply bag placed in front of Alex, across his strained face, then stopped on the department head, standing near the wall. Emily asked, her voice cold enough to erase all space in the room. "Why is he still here?" The department head blinked and tried to form a professional smile. "We're following investigative procedures. His case needs to be clarified before." "That's not my procedure." Emily cut him off. Every word he might have added was stopped cold. She walked over to Alex. His face was more hollow than the last time she had seen him. His eyes were red, whether from lack of sleep or a hospital phone call. She did not yet know. Without being invited by anyone in the room, Emily pulled out a chair and sat down at his level. "Do you want to leave here?" she asked quietly, without hesitation. Alex nodded faintly, his throat locked. She stood, pulled him up. "Come with me." No one dared block them, but eyes clung like hooks. When the door closed behind them, Alex leaned against the wall for a second to breathe. "What are you going to do to me now?" he asked, his voice worn down as if scraped hollow from the inside. Emily looked at him, her gaze angled but sharp. "Not to you. To them." Alex did not fully understand, but he saw that the caution she once carried was gone. In its place was something else. Resolve, mixed with the cold clarity of someone who had chosen a side, knowing that side would make everything far heavier. Emily led Alex out of the interrogation area and signaled to a security guard by the elevator. "Take him to the front gate. Don't hold him for a single minute." The guard hesitated for a beat, but did not argue. Alex looked back at her once, then followed the guard, and in that moment, Emily turned away, not waiting for him to say anything more. What she needed to do now was on the 16th floor, behind the boardroom doors that always demanded absolute composure. When Emily entered the boardroom, the shareholders were already seated. Warm lights reflected off the long wooden table, making the atmosphere more severe than necessary. Several people watched her with unreadable expressions, as if waiting for an explanation of why she had stepped outside the company's investigation process. Emily did not sit. She placed a stack of documents onto the table, the sound striking the room like a declaration of war. "This mechanism is wrong at its root," she said, without opening the files. "Every loss trail leads to the department under the heaviest KPI pressure. Cameras go dark at the exact moment of late approvals. Supplies are misrecorded, and the first person you point to is a night janitor. I'm initiating an independent audit immediately." One shareholder slammed his hand on the table, the crack sharp. "Are you trying to destroy the company?" "Emily, do you understand that opening an audit now could cost us contracts, reputation, and the stability we've built for years?" Emily met his stare without blinking. "I'm trying to fix it." No one expected her answer to come that fast. Another person leaned forward, voice carefully restrained. "Emily, if you do this, all data for 3 months must be re-examined. Every department will be called in. The press will ask questions. Shareholders will blame you. Is letting the system blame the wrong person better?" She replied, her voice controlled, but edged with a new sharpness. "I've reviewed every access log. You know exactly where it leads." At the far end of the table, the oldest member tapped a finger against the wood. "If you want an independent audit, you must sign a personal liability agreement. If the audit shows you were wrong or causes excessive internal damage, you lose your position immediately. You understand that?" Emily looked at the document pushed toward her by 2 dry fingers. The agreement stated clearly that she would bear personal responsibility for all consequences of the audit, good or bad. A perfect trap set by those unwilling to face the truth, but eager to push someone else into the storm. She picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake, did not pause. The room followed every movement. Some hoped she would retreat. Some hoped she would be afraid. But Emily was not the type to stop at danger. An unstable childhood had taught her to trust control, but it had also made her intolerant of lies. The pen touched the paper. She signed in one clear, straight, decisive stroke. As she set the pen down, she said, "Start tonight." The emergency audit launched in the middle of the night sent shockwaves through every level of Valortech. People long accustomed to sealed procedures, polished reports, and carefully hidden shortcuts began to feel the bite of real light. From hallways to once quiet offices, the air was taut like glass, needing only a small crack to shatter into fragments. Emily did not sleep. She stood in the data room with the independent audit team, people untouched by internal mechanisms and unaffected by the fear gripping the company. She followed every step they took, analyzing access logs, reopening old reports, and comparing printed versions with edited files. With each layer peeled away, the truth surfaced more clearly. One auditor frowned at the screen and zoomed in on the data modification table from the past 2 months, then motioned Emily over. "This isn't an error," he said, his voice firm as steel. "This is a pattern, and it's been going on for months." Emily studied the altered timelines, report submission times pushed back, then pulled forward again, and inventory items disappearing only to reappear under different ledgers. These could not be mistakes. They were deliberate acts, and intent usually had 2 motives: avoiding responsibility or keeping one's seat. In a temporary meeting room, managers were being called in one by one. At the first question, one manager shot back as if rehearsed. "I was just following targets from above. You don't understand the pressure of having to deliver clean numbers every week. I didn't act on my own." The man beside him slammed his hand on the table. "Don't drag me into this. You're the one who signed those late approvals, not me." His voice jumped sharply, cornered. The room grew thick like smoke. Everyone tried to push responsibility as far from themselves as possible. Emily stood at the center of the table, looking at them as if reading a psychological map, with every turn exposed. She spoke quietly, but in a way that forced attention. "Who signed matters less than why it had to be signed." The sentence dropped the room into silence. No one wanted to touch the core question: why adjustments were needed, why things were hidden, why blame was pushed downward. Another auditor looked up from the corner with an inventory report. "The losses aren't scattered. They appear right after each high-pressure KPI meeting, then vanish from departmental records and reappear in management adjustment lists." He flipped a page. "If this were normal procedure, then this entire department has been running a broken process for half a year without anyone noticing." Emily said nothing more. She looked at the glass wall, reflecting the group of people scrambling for cover from the light. In that moment, she knew the audit was no longer about a few supply boxes or a disabled camera. It was about digging up the skeletal structure of a machine she herself had believed was transparent. A sudden sound broke the air. The data alert system flashed red. Everyone turned toward the central monitor as it lit up, shifted from orange to full red. A message appeared against black. "Previous month, data not found. Possible system-level deletion. Error report unavailable." One auditor exclaimed, "This isn't a technical glitch. Someone just deleted the data." Confusion rippled through the room, but the department head nearly collapsed into his chair. His face drained of color, lips trembling. Who even has clearance to delete at that level? That's system access." Emily stared at the screen without blinking. "Only a very small group," she replied, "and they just confessed through action." People exchanged looks, but no one spoke. The air grew heavy as stone. Another manager jumped up, chairs scraping loudly. "I have nothing to do with this deletion. Don't look at me." Someone shot back instantly, voice sharp with anger. "You're the one holding backup access. You think anyone believes you didn't know what was happening?" Emily stepped forward, her voice precise, stripping excuses down to the bone. "There's no need to argue. Deleting data is the mark of someone afraid of being exposed." An auditor typed quickly, "We need to get to the data room now. Someone is still operating." Emily moved first, the group following. The corridor leading down to the data room was so empty they could hear elevators changing floors in the distance. Each footstep sounded like a countdown. She kept her composure, but she knew clearly, if the data were fully destroyed, the audit would lose critical evidence. They would say she exaggerated. They would say she manufactured a crisis. When they reached the data room door, light spilled out like a safe opening. Auditors took positions on either side. One pressed a fingerprint scanner. The door swung open, revealing rows of black servers pulsing with green lights. Emily entered first, her eyes scanning the monitors. Entire segments of last month's data were gone. Only a faint line remained: D. No stored file. She clenched her hand, but did not let anyone see. Suddenly, every light in the room cut out. Screens went dark in unison, plunging the room into dense shadow. The servers kept running, but their hum was not enough to break the abrupt stillness. A metallic sound came from the door, a lock turning, clear, sharp, cold, like someone placing a final period at the end of a story they did not want Emily to finish. The door was locked from the outside. When the data room door was opened again at dawn, Emily and the audit team stepped out, already knowing what had just happened. The person who deleted the data had exposed their deepest fear. There was no way back. What was destroyed did not weaken the investigation. On the contrary, it became the clearest proof that the old system had rotted from the inside. Emily reviewed the screens as they rebooted. An entire month of data wiped clean, as if it had never existed. She stood before the audit team, her gaze carrying a certainty no longer clouded by confusion or hesitation. They destroyed the data because they're afraid, she said, her voice low but resonant. And fear is the strongest evidence. The room fell silent. An auditor wrote that sentence into the record, knowing her words carried more weight than any document. Once someone with the authority to erase data took action, it meant they sat at the very center of the wrongdoing. The investigation immediately shifted from tracing missing supplies to reconstructing system access chains, command logs, and high-level deletion privileges. One by one, names were called. One by one, access rights were read aloud in front of their owners. A manager who had been the loudest during earlier questioning now slumped over the table. When the auditor read his name under system-level deletion access, his shoulders began to shake. I was just following company culture, he said, his voice breaking. The numbers always had to look good. Everywhere we were reminded that department heads couldn't be blamed. I did what everyone before me did, the auditor replied, without anger, cold and final. Culture does not erase guilt. The words dropped the room into a strange silence. A few people glanced at Emily, as if hoping she would intervene, but she said nothing, not because she wanted to judge them, but because the truth was now standing on its own. As more access rights were read, many in management realized the protection they had relied on had collapsed. Some were suspended on the spot, others asked to step down, unable to look at the screen. The walls of power. They believed Solid had lost their support. News spread quickly through the company, but no one expected the first visible change to come, not from compliance, but from finance. As Emily passed the accounting office, a staff member called her in urgently. "We just received a new approval," the employee said, handing over a file. "Expanded benefits for lower-level staff. The medical priority list has been updated immediately. Lily is now covered." Emily did not need to open the file. Her voice softened slightly with relief. "Proceed right away." The news reached Alex that same afternoon. He was standing outside the hospital room, his back against the wall, to keep himself from collapsing after nights without sleep. When the doctor explained the new policy and confirmed Lily's surgery was scheduled for that week, his legs nearly gave out. He rested his forehead against the door and whispered his daughter's name. Seeing Lily asleep, her breathing steadier, under medication, he murmured, "Thank you, not for the money, but because my child gets to breathe." A short sentence carrying both exhaustion and the relief of someone who had stepped back from the edge. Not long after, when Alex returned to his first night shift, since everything was resolved, he passed through the 12th floor hallway. The neon lights still flickered in intervals as they always had, but the feeling in his chest was different. There was no longer the guarded tension of earlier nights, no longer the sense of being the most replaceable person in the building. He pushed his utility cart at the familiar pace, but his steps carried more weight, as if the ground beneath him had finally settled. At the far end of the hallway, Emily was finishing a brief conversation with an auditor before they left the building. As Alex passed, she turned. Their eyes met for a moment. Alex gave a small nod. Thank you," he could not put into words. Emily replied, "You only asked for what the company owed you." The sentence was simple, but it was an acknowledgement he had never once heard from anyone with power in that building. In the weeks that followed, Valortech announced new accountability procedures. There was no longer a mechanism to push blame onto temporary staff or night workers. Lower-level employees gained the right to request report reviews if they detected discrepancies. All cameras in the building were placed on fixed inspection schedules. No more forgotten cameras used to create blind spots in the system. Each change felt like removing another stone from the yoke the building had long placed on its most vulnerable people. Alex listened to the changes in silence, but he felt each one clearly. He knew he would not be celebrated. He did not need that. He only needed the truth to stand where it belonged. On a quiet night, like any other, Alex pushed his cart down the long hallway, the wheels rolling evenly. The ceiling lights blinked in intervals, like the slow breathing of a building recovering. As he turned into the intersection between two corridors, he saw someone standing there, a new manager, recently transferred from another branch to fill a vacant role. The man stood slightly angled, light cutting across his expressionless face. As Alex approached, the man did not move, only watched him closely, his gaze calm, measuring, and observant. That look made Alex pause for a brief moment. A look he knew well, one he had felt on his back during the first nights he was being watched. A look exactly like the one Emily had once given him at the beginning. Every detail in the story of Alex and Emily reveals a truth worth reflecting on. Sometimes, what is wrong does not lie with the person at the lowest level, but with the very mechanism that pushes them into a position of suspicion. Alex is not a scapegoat. He is proof that when a system operates incorrectly, the first people to be harmed are always those with the least voice. And Emily, through her decision, reminds us that power only has meaning when it dares to face the truth, even when that truth takes away the safety one is used to. This story is not only about a case of missing supplies, but about responsibility, and about the courage to look closely at what people are used to ignoring. It reminds us that sometimes change begins with the willingness to say, "This is not right." If this story made you think, please share it, so others can learn from it as well. Thank you for staying until the end, and I commit to bringing you even more outstanding content. Don't forget to subscribe to follow more inspiring stories.